Have you ever walked away from someone and told yourself it was the right thing, only to find your thoughts quietly drifting back to them anyway? Not with regret, exactly, but with a strange mix of care, curiosity, and hope. It's confusing because you thought distance would bring clarity, yet it reveals something deeper instead. What if those lingering thoughts aren't weakness, but a hidden truth about how we really connect? And what if the way someone responds to losing you says more than anything that happened while you were together? When an avoidant chooses to walk away from someone, what they feel on the surface often looks like relief. In their mind, they've protected their freedom, kept their space intact, and avoided getting emotionally overwhelmed. But beneath that calm certainty, there's a much deeper and more complicated emotional layer, one filled with contradictions they may not even be fully aware of. What they quietly hope a rejected person will do is often the exact opposite of what most people expect. And that reveals something important. Avoidant behavior is rarely as simple as it seems. Most people react to being rejected by an avoidant in very predictable ways. They chase for answers, try to change their mind, ask for another chance, or push for closure. Some even express frustration or anger, hoping intensity will break through the emotional distance. But ironically, these reactions usually confirm everything the avoidant already believes. To them, pursuit feels like pressure. Emotional appeals can come across as manipulation. Requests for reassurance can reinforce their fear that relationships eventually turn into obligations filled with control and dependency. Instead of bringing them closer, these responses push them further away and strengthen their belief that creating distance was the right choice. But deep down, what they secretly want to see is something entirely different. They hope the person they rejected can accept the situation with calmness, dignity, and self-respect. They want to see someone who continues living a full and meaningful life without making their happiness dependent on the relationship. This desire connects to something much deeper within them. On an unconscious level, many avoidants are actually looking for proof that their beliefs about love aren't completely true. They want to see that closeness doesn't have to mean losing freedom, that love doesn't automatically turn into control, and that someone can genuinely care without creating pressure or expectations. In many ways, rejection becomes an unspoken test. Without realizing it, the avoidant is watching how the other person responds. Will they confirm their fears, or will they challenge them? When someone responds with quiet acceptance instead of chasing, something unexpected starts to happen inside the avoidant's mind. Their entire emotional system is built around one expectation, that people who love them will eventually become demanding, controlling, or unwilling to respect boundaries. When that expectation is broken, it creates a kind of internal confusion. For the first time, they're faced with the possibility that their defenses might be protecting them from something that isn't actually a threat. The kind of response they secretly hope for is simple but powerful. I respect your decision. I'm grateful for what we shared. I truly wish you well. Words like these do something that arguments and emotional reactions never can. They show emotional strength. They reflect confidence without ego, care without desperation, and self-respect without bitterness. But it doesn't stop with words. What they quietly hope to see next is that the person naturally moves forward, not out of pain or to make a statement, but because they're genuinely engaged in their own life. They want to see someone who continues growing, building, exploring, and enjoying life without being stuck on what didn't work out. Someone whose identity doesn't revolve around the relationship. This kind of independence directly challenges one of their deepest assumptions, that people who get close to them are secretly incomplete or looking for someone to fill a gap within themselves. They may also notice small signs over time. Maybe through mutual friends or social media, they see that the person is doing well, pursuing goals, meeting new people, enjoying life. This isn't about jealousy, it's about reassurance. Seeing someone thrive after rejection proves that their happiness wasn't dependent on the relationship. It shows emotional stability and resilience. And interestingly, this reflects how avoidants often see themselves. Many of them take pride in being emotionally self-sufficient, in moving on quickly, and in finding fulfillment outside of relationships. When they see someone else genuinely embodying those same qualities, it creates something rare: respect, recognition, even quiet admiration. And this is where internal conflict begins. They expected rejection to reveal insecurity or neediness. They expected to see signs of emotional dependence. But when none of that appears, when the other person remains grounded and continues to grow, it forces them to question their own beliefs. They start wondering, if this person wasn't trying to control me, if they truly respected my space, if they could love without losing themselves, then maybe my understanding of relationships isn't as accurate as I thought. That realization doesn't always lead to action, but it does leave an impact. Instead of simply moving on, they may find themselves thinking about that person more than expected. Not necessarily because they regret their decision, but because the experience doesn't fit into the mental framework they've always relied on. It feels unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity creates curiosity. They may start questioning whether this person is different, someone whose intentions weren't rooted in dependency or hidden expectations. And in some cases, they quietly hope that if life brings them back into each other's space, through work, shared circles, or mutual connections, the dynamic can shift into something lighter and more relaxed. Not as a strategy to rekindle anything, but as a genuine, pressure-free connection. Just two people who can interact with ease, share moments, and care about each other without emotional weight attached. This kind of connection feels safe to an avoidant. It shows emotional balance, confidence, and authenticity without threatening their need for space. It also reflects something deeper. Just because they chose to end the romantic relationship doesn't mean they stopped valuing the connection. In fact, many avoidants rarely experience a situation where something romantic transitions naturally into something healthy and platonic. Usually, people either disappear completely or stay while holding on to hope for more. Both extremes feel uncomfortable to them, but someone who can truly accept the shift, let go of expectations, and still show warmth without hidden motives, that's something they don't encounter often. And even if they never say it out loud, that kind of response leaves a lasting impression. It also shows a level of emotional awareness that avoidants deeply respect, even if they don't always realize it. What they often miss is that this quiet respect actually reveals something important about their own hidden needs. Many avoidants believe they're drawn to distance and independence, but what they're really searching for is emotional safety. They're attracted to people who can care deeply without becoming controlling, possessive, or overly dependent. They want connection that doesn't feel heavy, pressured, or like an obligation. So when someone handles rejection with grace, they're unknowingly showing the avoidant exactly the kind of love they've been hoping exists. For a lot of avoidants, rejection isn't just a decision, it becomes an unconscious test. Instead of openly sharing their fears, they create space and then watch how the other person reacts. Through that distance, they're trying to figure out whether being close would feel safe or overwhelming. Most people don't pass this test, not because they're wrong, but because their reactions are natural. Some chase, some get angry, some push boundaries, and each of those responses ends up confirming what the avoidant already believes, that closeness leads to pressure and loss of freedom. But every now and then, someone responds differently. They accept the situation without losing their dignity. They keep moving forward with purpose. They stay emotionally steady, and instead of reinforcing fear, they show that connection doesn't have to come with control or dependence. That becomes powerful proof that a different kind of relationship might actually be possible. There's another reason this test exists. By rejecting first, the avoidant keeps control of the situation while quietly hoping to find someone whose emotional strength doesn't depend on them. What they truly want isn't someone who needs them to feel okay. They want someone who chooses them while already being okay on their own. That difference matters more than they usually admit, and rejection becomes one of the ways they try to figure that out, even if they don't realize it. Underneath all of this is one of their biggest fears, the fear of becoming responsible for someone else's emotional state. The idea of carrying another person's happiness can feel overwhelming, so they create distance before it ever reaches that point. When someone responds to rejection by staying balanced, continuing to grow, and genuinely enjoying life, it sends a powerful message. It shows that this person can take care of their own emotions. It suggests that any relationship wouldn't require the avoidant to be a rescuer, caretaker, or source of fulfillment. And that feels unexpectedly safe. Many avoidants also quietly hope that rejection becomes a moment of growth for the other person. Not something that leaves them bitter or broken, but something that pushes them toward self-awareness and emotional strength. They respect people who can turn pain into growth instead of getting stuck in it. This mirrors how they often see themselves: resilient, self-reliant, and able to move forward without being consumed by setbacks. When they see someone else handle things the same way, it earns genuine respect. When a rejected partner accepts the situation, keeps evolving, and builds an even better life afterward, it starts to challenge one of the avoidant's deepest beliefs. They often assume that anyone who feels strongly about them must be insecure or looking for validation. But seeing someone confident and emotionally grounded move forward with strength tells a completely different story. It shows that emotionally secure people can value them too. That realization is both comforting and unsettling. For many avoidants, their identity is tied to being independent, composed, and different from others. When someone else shows that same emotional strength after being rejected, it creates two reactions at once. Part of them feels challenged because they're no longer the only one who embodies those qualities. But another part feels drawn in because they're finally seeing someone who reflects the kind of emotional balance they admire. This creates a kind of inner tension. One side feels uncomfortable because their sense of uniqueness is being questioned. The other side feels attracted because they recognize someone who truly understands boundaries, freedom, and emotional responsibility. Both feelings exist at the same time, and that's where deeper change can begin. They also quietly hope the person they rejected can still value what they shared without attaching it to how things ended. They want the connection to matter simply because it happened, not because it turned into a long-term relationship. To an avoidant, something doesn't have to last forever to be meaningful. A connection can still be real, impactful, and important, even if it ends. This reflects how they often process relationships. They tend to see them as moments and experiences, rather than something that must continue indefinitely. For them, something temporary isn't automatically insignificant. In fact, some of their most meaningful memories come from connections that didn't last, but still mattered deeply in the moment. This way of thinking also explains their complicated relationship with intimacy. Despite how they appear, many avoidants do want closeness. They enjoy deep conversations. They value being understood. They appreciate vulnerability when it feels safe. What they struggle with is the idea that intimacy always has to lead to more commitment, more dependence, more merging of lives. That expectation can feel overwhelming. So when someone can appreciate the connection without pushing it to become something bigger, it offers a version of intimacy that feels safe. It shows that closeness doesn't have to mean losing independence. Underneath everything, many avoidants carry a quiet sadness about their difficulty maintaining relationships. Even when they're the ones who leave, it doesn't mean it's easy. Often, they wish they could hold on to the best parts, the laughter, the deep talks, the feeling of being seen, without facing the expectations they associate with long-term commitment. The person who can appreciate those moments without demanding more becomes an example of something different. A kind of connection that feels lighter, less threatening, and more sustainable. And beyond all of this, avoidants often hope one more thing for the person they rejected. They hope that person continues to value themselves in every future relationship. They don't want them to lower their standards or accept less out of fear of being alone. They want them to experience real respect, emotional security, and genuine care, even if it's not with them. This reveals a level of care that avoidants don't always express openly. Even if they couldn't give the relationship what it needed, they often still want the other person to find happiness somewhere else. And sometimes, that realization catches them off guard more than anything else. After ending a relationship, an avoidant person might expect to feel completely detached, like it won't affect them much at all. But that's not always what happens. Instead, they often find themselves quietly wondering how the other person is doing. They may hope that their ex is healing, finding peace, and moving toward a life that genuinely makes them happy. These emotions can feel confusing. Rather than recognizing them as signs of real care, avoidants tend to interpret them differently. They often reassure themselves that ending the relationship was the right and even kind decision, that stepping away prevented deeper pain down the line and gave both people a chance to find lives that better fit who they are. Because of this, seeing the other person doing well becomes emotionally comforting. When their ex builds a meaningful and fulfilling life without them, it helps the avoidant make sense of their choice. It supports the idea that the breakup didn't cause lasting harm. Instead, they can frame the relationship as something that, in the end, benefited both people. This perspective allows them to look back without being overwhelmed by guilt. They can appreciate what was shared, acknowledge the connection, and believe that the ending created space for both individuals to grow in the directions they needed. Watching someone thrive after rejection doesn't just highlight that person's strength, it also gives the avoidant a quiet sense of relief. It reinforces the belief that caring about someone doesn't always mean staying, and that something meaningful can exist even if it doesn't last forever. At a deeper level, avoidants need to believe that their choices don't leave lasting emotional damage. Accepting that they've deeply hurt someone would clash with how they see themselves, as thoughtful, rational, and ultimately well-meaning. So when the person they walked away from shows resilience, stability, and growth, it helps them feel that their decision, while difficult, wasn't destructive. What they often don't realize is that these private hopes reveal more about them than about the person they left. The qualities they admire in someone who handles rejection with grace are the same qualities that would make them feel safe enough to stay in a relationship. Emotional maturity, independence, a willingness to grow, and the ability to love without turning it into control. These are the things they're drawn to, even if they don't consciously recognize it. In some cases, rejection becomes an unconscious test. Without realizing it, they watch how the other person responds, looking for signs of emotional security, the kind that would make closeness feel safe instead of overwhelming. The reality is, many people react to rejection in ways that unintentionally reinforce an avoidant's fears. Responses driven by desperation, anger, or the need to change their mind can confirm their belief that intimacy leads to pressure and emotional dependency. But sometimes, someone responds differently. They accept what happened with self-respect. They keep building their life. They stay open-hearted without becoming dependent. When that happens, it stands out. The avoidant begins to notice something they didn't expect, someone who might actually be capable of a healthy, balanced relationship. Ironically, the people who respond this way are usually the least likely to chase an avoidant in the first place. Emotionally secure individuals tend to notice distance early, respect it, and avoid forcing closeness where it isn't truly welcomed. Because of this, avoidants don't often encounter the kind of response they secretly admire, but when they do, it can shift how they see both that person and relationships in general. Instead of viewing someone as a source of pressure, they begin to see someone fundamentally different from past experiences. It can even expand their understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like, one where closeness doesn't mean losing independence, and where two people can care deeply without becoming emotionally entangled in an unhealthy way. Another reason avoidants hope for calm acceptance after a breakup is tied to one of their deepest fears: being responsible for someone else's pain. When a person reacts with intense heartbreak, anger, or constant attempts to change their decision, it reinforces the belief that relationships inevitably lead to suffering. But when someone responds with quiet strength and emotional balance, it shows them something entirely different. It proves that love doesn't have to end in destruction, and that connection doesn't have to come at the cost of losing yourself. Ironically, their fear of causing pain often leads to the very outcome they're trying to avoid. By pulling away, shutting down, or ending things too soon, they can create unnecessary hurt. But when they see someone handle rejection with resilience, it interrupts that pattern. It shows them that another person's well-being isn't entirely dependent on their choices. That realization can feel freeing. It allows them to approach future relationships with less fear and more focus on compatibility rather than avoidance. Someone who accepts rejection with dignity, continues to grow, and builds a meaningful life becomes living proof that many of the avoidance assumptions aren't entirely true. They show that it's possible to care deeply without losing yourself, to value love without turning it into possession, and to maintain self-worth regardless of whether a relationship continues. For the avoidant, witnessing this can be deeply impactful. It may not change them overnight, but over time, it can reshape how they understand love, trust, and emotional safety. Gradually, they may become more open to vulnerability because they've seen that closeness doesn't always lead to loss of freedom or emotional harm. Understanding what an avoidant quietly hopes for after a breakup can offer clarity, but it's not about trying to perform or manipulate an outcome. It's not about acting a certain way to win someone back. The healthiest response is also the most genuine one. Accept what happened, respect yourself, and protect your dignity. Keep focusing on your own growth, your purpose, and your happiness. Whether your path eventually leads back to that person or towards someone new, it strengthens your emotional foundation and prepares you for healthier connections. The irony is that the response avoidants secretly hope for is the same response that truly benefits the person who was rejected. Choosing growth over resentment, holding on to self-worth instead of chasing validation, and building a fulfilling life rather than waiting for someone else's decision. These choices create lasting positive change, no matter how things turn out. In the end, what fulfills the avoidant's unspoken hopes is also what most powerfully supports your healing, confidence, and long-term happiness. What this all comes down to is something simple, yet deeply powerful. How you choose to respond when something meaningful ends says more about your strength than the relationship ever did. You may never fully understand the reasons behind someone walking away, and you don't need to. What truly matters is what you do next. When you choose dignity over desperation, growth over resentment, and self-worth over seeking validation, you shift the entire narrative of your life. You stop being someone waiting for closure and become someone who creates it from within. And in doing so, you unknowingly challenge the very beliefs that made the other person leave in the first place. Not by proving anything to them, but by proving everything to yourself. Because real power is quiet. It's in continuing to build a life that feels meaningful, even without the person you once thought you needed. It's in caring without clinging, loving without losing yourself, and accepting without collapsing. Whether they ever look back or not becomes irrelevant, because you're no longer standing still hoping for a different ending. You're moving forward, becoming someone stronger, more grounded, and more emotionally free. And maybe that's the greatest truth of all. The response they secretly hoped for is the very response that sets you free.